Hello again, coming to you once more from the basement of Casa de Dralas. And we're looking at now ways in which the Federal Reserve Bank, which is the decentralized central bank of the United States, will try to combat unemployment and inflation. All right, now this is more of obviously a Keynesian approach to all this, and Hayek would probably say something more so along the lines of, well, just let the free markets reign, and don't try to, the government shouldn't try to inject or alter business cycles or anything of that nature. Just beware of the boom. During the boom, start saving and save before you spend. Okay, that's Hayek. Keynes is going to say that the government should inject money into society, or inject more dollars into society, either through monetary or fiscal policy, in order to achieve full employment. All right, and through monetary policy, there are four ways that we're going to talk about here in which the Fed does that. One involves fractional reserve banking through the use of reserve requirements. Two is the discount rate. Three is the federal funds rate, and four is something we call open market operations. All right, and so those are the four tools of the Fed. The main one that is used is open market operations. That is the main tool used by the Fed, open market operations. Okay, and so looking at the first one, fractional reserve banking through the reserve requirement. What this means is that the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank, tells your local banks, your Chase, your Bank of America, your whatever, Clarkson State Bank, they set a requirement that they have to keep in the vault, that they cannot loan out to other people. Usually it's about 10%. And so that means if you put $100 in there, the bank can loan out 90 and put $10. They have to keep $10 in the vault. That way, if there's a run on the banks, or whatever, the banks can hopefully meet their deposits, hopefully meet their requirements. Okay, and so that's why your bank account is insured up to $250,000. And the reason why they're able to do that is through fractional reserve banking and the reserve requirement. Okay? And in class, I will go through step by step how this can really drastically increase or decrease the money supply by changing it very slightly. And so the Fed very rarely, if ever, will use increase or decrease reserve requirements in order to change the money supply. The last time they did it was almost 20 years ago, so it's been a great deal of time since they've used reserve requirements in order to alter the money supply. Okay, and so again, a reserve requirement of 10% means you give them $100, the bank has to keep 10 in the vault. They can't give it to other people. All right, if the reserve requirement is 15%, then they can loan out 85, and they have to keep 15 in the vault. So you can see the basic idea there. Okay, and so like I said, in class we'll go through a step-by-step how this really does alter things. All right. Next is the discount rate. The discount rate is the interest rate that the Fed charges local banks, charges Chase, charges Bank of America for loans. All right, and so why would Chase or Bank of America, why would they take out a loan from the Fed? The reason being is because of the reserve requirement. They have to keep X amount in the vault, a percentage in the vault. Okay, but if you go in there and you borrow $250,000 maybe to buy a house, that's going to force them to dip into their reserves, which they're not allowed to do. So what do? They will borrow that money from the Fed, and they'll have to pay, and the Fed will charge them interest on that loan, which then the bank will charge you. Okay, and so the discount rate is the interest rate that the Federal Reserve charges local banks in order to take out loans to meet their reserve requirement. Okay, so if we're talking about a tight money policy, which means that the Fed wants to contract or take money out of the money supply, then they'll raise the discount rate. Say maybe from 5% to 6%, 7%, 8%, whatever. Okay, by raising that interest rate, that will discourage borrowing and take dollars out of society overall. Okay, if it's a loose money policy, then the Fed will lower the discount rate. Okay, they'll lower it 5%, 4%, 3%, whatever, maybe all the way down to 0. all right, and that will encourage borrowing and spending. That'll inject more dollars into society. Okay, that's the discount rate. Easily confused with the federal funds rate. Don't make that mistake. Okay, the federal funds rate is very similar. It is the interest rate that local banks charge each other for loans to meet the reserve requirement. So what does that mean? So let's say you go to Chase to borrow $250,000 to buy a house. Chase has to dip into their reserve requirement in order to do that. They can go across the street to Bank of America to borrow money in order to meet the reserve requirement. Now, if they do that, obviously Bank of America is not going to just give Chase money. They're going to charge them interest. That interest rate is established and set by the Fed, and that's what the federal funds rate is. And the loose money and tight money policy is the same. So if it's a tight money policy, if we want to take dollars out of society, control inflation, then the Fed will implement a tight money policy and raise the federal funds rate. If it's a loose money policy, they'll lower the federal funds rate. Encourage borrowing, encourage banks to do this. All right? And last, and the most difficult to understand, is open market operations. Open market operations involves the buying and selling of securities through the Department of Treasury. Okay? Securities are things like bonds, things like that. Okay? Government bonds, things of that nature. Okay? And so you have to think about the transaction that takes place in terms of loose or tight money policy. All right? If we're dealing with a loose money policy, and I have to keep cheat sheet myself in order to remind me. Okay? In a loose money policy, the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank, will buy securities. And so if you think of a security as maybe like a piece of paper or a bond or whatever, okay, or think of it as whatever you want, okay, something tangible, and the Fed is buying securities, that means the Fed is taking a security and giving dollars for that security. So take the security and giving the Department of Treasury dollars. The Department of Treasury will then send that out into society. Okay? That's a loose money policy. A tight money policy would be the Fed selling securities. Okay, so if we're selling securities, okay, if this represents a security, there's a security to the Department of Treasury, and the Fed will take dollars out of society. So you have to think about the transaction when it comes to tight or loose money policy and open market operations. And we'll go over this further in class, because undoubtedly you'll want me to do that. Okay? Now, when and why would a Fed implement either a tight or loose money policy? Well, if there's high unemployment, like there's been over the past 5 or 6 years, 10 years in Michigan, if there's high unemployment, then the Fed will implement a loose money policy to encourage borrowing, encourage spending, in order to boost aggregate demand. And hopefully that will encourage businesses, through the increased sales, to hire more workers. Okay, and so through the hopes of boosting aggregate demand, implement a loose money policy to encourage borrowing, to encourage spending. All right? But if inflation is out of control, if things are getting way too expensive too quickly, beyond that 3 to 5%, okay, beyond that level, then the Fed will try to implement tight money policy. Okay? Raise discount rates, raise federal funds rates. Okay? Sell securities. And they'll do this in order to control inflation. So it's all a matter of what do they want to influence? What do they want to change? Do they want to improve employment figures, or do they want to improve inflation? Okay? On the employment side, you'll implement a loose policy. On the inflation side, you'll implement a tight policy. All right? Which gets into, again, we'll talk about stagflation and the flaw in Keynesian theory in a little bit. Okay? Realize went through this kind of quick. We will dissect this more in class. I just want to make sure that you have access to the basics that you can repetitively watch. All right? Have a great day.